Story by U slash I and Psalm Nai A 1 Part 1. The Morning Chapter 1. How the brain works. I want to start by explaining something about the way the human brain operates during routine activities. Because what I am about to tell you only makes sense if you understand this first. And I have spent long enough being not believed to know that the science helps. The brain does not operate as a single unified process. It operates on multiple levels simultaneously, and these levels have different functions and different relationships with what we consciously experience as being awake. The level that most people think of when they think of their thinking self, the level that makes decisions and forms sentences and has preferences and opinions and notices things, is not the only level that is doing things at any given moment. Beneath it, or alongside it, or woven through it, there are other levels handling the ongoing tasks that do not require the full attention of the conscious mind. Tasks so practiced and so repeated that they have been transferred to a lower level of processing that can handle them without upstairs needing to be involved. This is efficient. This is, in fact, one of the genuinely elegant features of human cognitive architecture. You do not need to think about how to walk while you are walking. You do not need to think about regulating your breathing while you are breathing. The lower levels handle this automatically so that the upper levels are free to think about other things, about your destination and what you will do when you get there and whether you left the stove on. The technical name for this lower level processing is automaticity. The informal name, the name that people use when they describe the experience from the inside, is autopilot. Most people have experienced autopilot in a minor way. You have driven a familiar route and arrived at your destination without any clear memory of the drive. You have walked from one room of your house to another and forgotten why you came. You have performed a well-practiced sequence of actions so automatically that the upper level of your brain, the conscious you, was elsewhere the entire time, thinking about something else entirely. Autopilot is activated by routine. The brain recognizes a familiar sequence and hands it off to the lower level because the lower level knows this sequence and can handle it reliably, while the upper level occupies itself with something more demanding. The trigger for this handoff is often a specific starting condition, a specific time of day, a specific location, a specific sensory cue that signals to the brain, this is the routine. Engage autopilot. What the brain does not do well in autopilot mode is process exceptions to the routine. An exception is a deviation from the established sequence, something that is different from how it usually is. The brain in autopilot mode will frequently fail to register exceptions because the lower level that is running the routine was not designed to notice exceptions. It was designed to run the routine. Noticing exceptions is the upper level's job, and the upper level is busy. And so the exception goes unregistered, and the routine continues, and the lower level does what the lower level does, which is complete the sequence regardless. I am telling you all of this because I need you to understand that what happened on the morning of June 17th was not the result of negligence or carelessness or bad parenting. It was not the result of any failure of love. It was the result of a mechanism in the human brain that has nothing to do with any of those things. And that can happen to anyone who has a sufficiently established routine and a sufficiently distracted morning. What happened on the morning of June 17th could have happened to anyone. That is not the part that frightens me now. Chapter 2. The morning of June 17th, my name is David Marsh, and at the time of these events, I was 34 years old and I lived in a 3-bedroom house on the outskirts of a town I will not name for reasons that will become clear. I had lived in this house for 4 years, first with my wife Sarah, And then, after Sarah died of an aneurysm at 31 in the October of what should have been an unremarkable year, with my daughter Gracie alone. Gracie was 4 years old on June 17th. She had Sarah's eyes, which were the specific shade of brown that looks different in different lights, almost amber in sunshine and almost black in the evening. Eyes that I had fallen in love with before any other feature of the woman I would marry, and that I could not look at in my daughter's face without feeling the full weight of the 2.5 years since Sarah had died, not as an acute pain, but as a chronic one, the kind you learn to carry rather than set down. We had a routine, Gracie and I. We had built it in the months after Sarah died with the deliberate and necessary care of someone constructing a structure that would need to bear significant weight. The routine was the frame of our days, the thing that held the days in the shape of ordinary life when the pull of grief was trying to pull them into some other shape entirely. The morning routine was the most important of the routines, because mornings were the hardest. Mornings were when Sarah's absence was most specific, when the particular texture of the morning Sarah and I had shared, the coffee and the radio and the half-eaten toast, and the comfortable parallel occupation of people who have been together long enough to be silent together without difficulty, was most acutely not there. So the morning routine was precise and reliable, and we kept it to the minute, Gracie and I, the way sailors keep their bearings by the stars. The alarm at 7, the shower while Gracie slept, the breakfast preparation, 1 bowl of cereal for Gracie, 1 cup of coffee for me. The waking of Gracie, who was not a cheerful waker and who needed the specific approach of being called from the doorway twice, and then the light turned on, and the television put on the specific channel she liked before she would commit to the project of getting out of bed. The dressing of Gracie, the eating of breakfast, the loading of Gracie into the car with her backpack, which she carried herself because she insisted on this, even though the backpack was almost the same size she was. And the insistence was one of the specific things about her that made it possible to get through the day. The drive to her nursery, which was 12 minutes on the route I always took. The drop-off. The drive to work, every morning. Every single morning exactly this way for 2.5 years. On the morning of June 17th, the routine deviated once, in a minor and completely unremarkable way, in the first 2 minutes. My phone, which usually went from my bedside table to my bag while I was in the shower, was lower on battery than expected. I plugged it in to charge on the kitchen counter rather than packing it immediately. This was all. This was the whole of the deviation. My phone was on the counter charging instead of in my bag. Then I got in the shower and the routine continued and the autopilot engaged and the deviation was forgotten. I showered. I shaved. The radio in the bathroom forecast exceptional weather for the day. I went to wake Gracie. I called her name twice from the doorway, turned on the light, put on her television channel. She resisted, grumbled, negotiated, and then accepted the morning the way she always did. I made her cereal. I poured my coffee. She ate. She complained that her cereal was too milky. I told her to eat it anyway. She ate it anyway, making her opinion known through the specific facial expressions that were another of the things about her that made it possible. I dressed her. She wanted to wear the red jumper. We were past jumper weather by June, and I told her this. She made her opinion known. We negotiated. The red jumper was worn. I loaded her into the car. Her backpack was enormous on her small frame. She carried it herself. I buckled her into the child's seat. She complained about the sun getting in her eyes and shifted in the seat to put herself out of the glare, and I heard the rustle of her moving, and I smiled, and I drove. I drove the 12 minutes. I was thinking about work, about the meeting I had in the afternoon that I had been poorly prepared for, and that I had been meaning to prepare for all week and had not. I was thinking about whether I had time to look through the relevant documents over lunch. I was thinking about whether I should grab a coffee from the drive-thru on the way to the office, which was something I did sometimes but not every morning, which was why it occupied the upper level's attention rather than being handled by autopilot. I got the coffee. I drove to work. I got to my desk. I opened my computer. I reached into my bag for my phone. My phone was not in my bag. Chapter 3. My phone was on the counter. My phone was on the counter. This was not in itself a crisis. I had forgotten my phone before. It was inconvenient. It meant a morning without my phone, which in practice meant checking email on the computer instead and missing any calls, neither of which was the end of the world. I sat at my desk and made a mental note to text my colleague from my computer if anything urgent came through, and I opened my emails, and I began looking at the documents for the afternoon meeting. 40 minutes later, my colleague came to my desk and said that the nursery had called the office number because they had been unable to reach me on my mobile. I was already standing before the thought had fully formed. He said, "They said Gracie has not arrived." My phone was on the counter. I was in my car before I finished processing this. I was driving before I understood what I was doing. The 12 minutes back to the nursery were 12 minutes during which the upper level of my brain was doing the thing the upper level does when it receives information that does not fit any existing category, which is to try category after category in rapid succession, looking for the one that makes the information make sense. Gracie had not arrived at nursery. I had left for work after dropping her at nursery. My phone was on the counter, which meant I had not packed my bag in the normal way, which meant the routine had been broken first thing, which meant the autopilot had been engaged in the shower and had overwritten the break in the routine and had run the rest of the morning as though nothing was different. But something had been different. My phone was on the counter. I had not packed my bag. I had gone on autopilot. And on autopilot, the routine ran. The routine included dropping Gracie at nursery. But if the phone was on the counter and the autopilot was running the routine from memory, from the neural grooves of 2.5 years of the same morning repeated, then what had I actually done, and what had the autopilot told me I had done? I pulled into the nursery car park. The notice on the door said, "Due to overnight vandalism to the main entrance, please use the side door." Today only. A change in the routine. I had driven down the nursery street. I had passed the nursery. My autopilot expected me to turn right into the car park, but I had been drinking the coffee I did not get every morning, which occupied my upper level enough that the autopilot drove past the nursery because the nursery entrance was different today, and the autopilot did not register different. I had driven past. My phone was on the counter. I had driven to work. I had not dropped Gracie at nursery. She was in the car. She was in the car park at my office in the June heat that the radio had that morning forecast as exceptional. I ran. Part 2, after Chapter 4, what they found she was alive. She was alive, and she was in the hospital for 3 days, and she had elevated core temperature and dehydration, and the specific name for what had happened to her in the car. And the doctor used the clinical vocabulary for these things in the measured way of someone who has spent a career delivering difficult information, and who understands that the vocabulary is both a shield and a precision instrument. She was alive. I want to be clear about this because what comes after is going to make it difficult to believe, and I need you to hold onto the fact that she was alive, that the car park was shaded in the morning, that I had gotten the coffee and been back at my desk within 40 minutes of arriving at work, and that the colleague and the nursery and the missing phone had combined to get me back to the car park in time. that the temperature in the car had not yet reached the threshold it would have reached in another 40 minutes or another hour. She was alive. But the 3 days in the hospital were 3 days in which I sat beside her bed in the specific state of a person who has done something and cannot undo it, and who is in the process of understanding the full weight of what they have done and finding that the weight is everything. The entire weight of the world concentrated into the specific fact of a 4-year-old girl in a hospital bed with monitors on her, and enrollment 4 in her small arm. I did not sleep during those 3 days. I am not saying this for sympathy. I am saying it because the not sleeping is relevant to what happened next, because the not sleeping and the grief and the guilt and the particular state of a person in the aftermath of something they cannot forgive themselves for produced, in me, a heightened receptivity to things I would otherwise have explained away. A lowered threshold, a sensitivity to the world that my ordinary defenses were not in a sufficient state to guard against. The nurses who came to check on Gracie in the night were kind. They moved quietly and efficiently, and they spoke to her when she woke, which she did twice each night, in low and reassuring voices. They knew my name by the second day. They brought me coffee I did not ask for and told me she was going to be fine, which I could see from the monitors and which I needed to hear anyway. On the second night, the nurse who came at 3 in the morning was not one I recognized. Chapter 5. The nurse at 3 in the morning, she was young, younger than the others, with dark hair pinned back the way all the nurses wore their hair on the ward. And she moved the same way they moved, quietly and with the efficient purposefulness of someone who knows exactly where everything is and what it is for. She went to Gracie's monitor. She checked the readings. She made a small adjustment that I did not understand to one of the lines going into the Roman 4. I was sitting in the chair beside the bed and I watched her do all of this and I thought nothing of it. Then she looked at me. She had Sarah's eyes. The specific shade of brown that looks different in different lights, almost amber in the dim illumination of the monitoring equipment. The specific shape of them, slightly wider than average, with the quality of someone who is genuinely attending to what they see rather than simply looking at it. The specific expression in them, which was the expression Sarah had had when she was worried and trying not to communicate the worry, the expression of someone keeping something controlled for the sake of the other person. I stared at her. She looked at me for a moment with Sarah's eyes in a stranger's face, and then she looked back at Gracie. She said, in a voice that was not Sarah's voice, "She is going to be all right." I said, "I know." She said, "You did not know this morning." I looked at her. She was looking at Gracie, and the expression on her face as she looked at our daughter was an expression I recognized. It was the specific expression that Sarah had had when she looked at Gracie, the expression of someone looking at the most important thing they have ever seen, the expression of love that has no performance in it, because it is being directed at something that does not need to be impressed. My throat closed. I said, "Who are you?" She looked at me again. The eyes, the specific amber brown that changed in changing light. She said, "She is going to be all right. David. She is going to be all right." Then she went to the door and she was gone. I got up. I went to the door and I looked into the corridor. The corridor was the corridor, lit in its nighttime configuration of half lights. The nurses' station visible at the far end with 2 nurses sitting at it, both of them with their backs to me, working on charts. I went to the nurses' station. I described the nurse I had seen. I described her hair and her age and her eyes in particular. Both nurses at the station looked up. They looked at each other. One of them said, "We are the only 2 on this ward tonight. There is no one else on night shift." I said, "She was in my daughter's room." The nurse said, "We are the only 2 on this ward." I went back to the room. Gracie was asleep. the monitors regular and reassuring. The chair beside the bed was the chair I had been sitting in. The room was the room. I sat back down. I looked at the Roman 4 line. I had not been able to see clearly in the half-dark of the room and from my angle in the chair what the adjustment the nurse had made to the Roman 4 line was. But I could see now, in the monitoring equipment's steady light, that the small air bubble that I had noticed an hour ago in the line just below the drip chamber was gone. An air bubble in a Roman 4 line was not, in most circumstances, the emergency it was sometimes portrayed as in film and television. A small bubble would simply be absorbed. A large bubble was a different matter. This bubble had been the size of a thumbnail, which was in the territory between small and large, in the territory where a reasonable person might watch it for a while before calling a nurse. I had been watching it for a while. It was gone now. I sat in the chair and I looked at the door through which the nurse with Sarah's eyes had left, and I sat there for the rest of the night without sleeping. And in the morning, Gracie woke up and asked for cereal, and the doctor said her numbers were excellent and she could go home in 2 days. Chapter 6. Going home, I took Gracie home on the 4th day. She walked out of the hospital with the particular purposefulness of a 4-year-old who has been in a bed for 3 days and who has opinions about this and is ready to communicate them to the world through the medium of forward motion. She was wearing the red jumper because it had been in her bag and she had asked for it, and I was in no position to argue about a jumper. I buckled her into her child's seat. I sat in the driver's seat. I did not start the car. I sat in the car in the hospital car park and I thought about the morning routine. I thought about what the routine had done and what the routine had failed to do and what the routine would do if I let it run again unchecked. I thought about the lower level of the brain and its efficiency and its blindness to exceptions. Then Gracie, from the back seat, said, "Daddy, the bad sun is in my eyes." I looked in the rearview mirror. She was shifting in her seat to get out of the glare, exactly the way she had shifted on the morning of June 17th. The small rustle of movement, the particular complaint about the bad sun. On the morning of June 17th, I had heard that rustle and smiled and driven to work. I had heard it. I had heard her shift in the seat. I looked in the mirror at my daughter squinting against the sun, and I thought about the morning of June 17th with the specific precision of someone who has been reviewing every second of it for 4 days. And what I could not account for, what I had not been able to account for in 4 days of reviewing, was the rustle. Because Gracie had not been in the car on the morning of June 17th. Gracie had not been in the car, and I had heard her shift in her seat, and I had smiled, and I had driven. If Gracie was not in the car, if the routine had run and the autopilot had driven and there was no Gracie in the seat, what had I heard? Part 3, The Understanding, Chapter 7. The things I started remembering. I did not sleep for most of the following week either. This is not an exaggeration for effect. I slept for 3 or 4 hours each night, in the chair in Gracie's room where I had taken to sitting after she was asleep, positioned so that I could see both the door and the bed and could not miss anything that came in or went out. During the days, while Gracie was at nursery, which she returned to 10 days after the hospital, I sat at my kitchen table and I went through the 1.5 years since Sarah died with the deliberate and systematic attention of someone auditing a record they have previously accepted without examination. I am going to tell you what I found. 3 weeks after Sarah died, I was in the kitchen making dinner and I heard her in the hallway. Not footsteps, not anything that dramatic. The specific sound that Sarah made when she walked through our hallway in her socks, which was a sound I had been hearing for 6 years, and that was as specific to her as her voice. A particular slide on the boards near the bathroom door that nobody else produced, because nobody else had exactly the walk she had. I heard that sound, and I set down what I was doing, and I went to the hallway, and the hallway was empty, and I stood there for a long time before I went back to the kitchen. I had explained this away. Grief does things to a person's perception. The mind, in shock, reaches for the familiar, and sometimes reaches far enough to produce sensory experiences that are not there. This was a known phenomenon. I had read about it. I had accepted the explanation. 4 months after Sarah died, I was driving back from the supermarket, Gracie in her seat in the back, and I heard a voice from the passenger side that said, "You forgot the milk." I had forgotten the milk. It was on the list. I had not bought it. I looked at the passenger seat. The passenger seat was empty. I had felt, in the second before I looked, the specific quality of presence that a passenger produces, the altered weight of the air in the car, the particular pressure differential, something that was not quite a sound or a sight, but that registered in the peripheral experience the way another person in the space always registered. The seat was empty. I had not bought the milk. I had explained this away. 6 months after Sarah died, Gracie had woken crying in the night, and by the time I got to her room, she was quiet. She was sitting up in her bed with the specific expression of a child who has been comforted, the afterglow of distress that has been met with something soothing, the wet cheeks and the calming breath. She told me that Mummy had come. I had told her it was a dream. 8 months after Sarah died, I had gone to bed and reached across to Sarah's side of the bed in the half-sleep of the moment before unconsciousness, and I had felt warmth, residual warmth, the warmth of a place that had been recently occupied. I had explained this away as my own body heat. I sat at my kitchen table, and I went through the 18 months, and I counted 14 instances of things I had explained away. 14 instances of sensory experience that was specific enough to not be random and persistent enough to not be anomaly. And I thought, what if I had been explaining away the wrong thing? What if the grief was making me explain the real thing away, rather than manufacturing the unreal thing? Chapter 8. What I understood about the morning, I understood the morning of June 17th differently after the week of not sleeping and reviewing. The routine had run. The autopilot had been engaged. The lower level of my brain had taken over the morning and had run it from the established template. I had gone through the motions of the morning exactly as I did every morning, and the lower level had told the upper level, which was somewhere else thinking about the afternoon meeting, that everything was proceeding according to routine. But the lower level was working from the template of the routine, which included certain sensory inputs as checkpoints. Gracie's complaints at breakfast, the weight of her backpack as she carried it, the specific sound she made in the child's seat. These were part of the routine's template, and the lower level expected them, and when something produced them, the lower level registered the checkpoint as complete. Something had produced them. Something had provided the sensory checkpoints. The morning had run with the inputs the autopilot needed to complete without deviation. The rustle of movement in the child's seat. The complaint about the bad son. The lower level had received these inputs and had filed them as Gracie and had continued. But Gracie had not been in the car, so something else had provided the inputs. I sat with this at the kitchen table for a very long time. I sat with all the explanations, and I rejected them one by one, because I had spent a week not sleeping and reviewing the record. And I was no longer in the mood for the kind of explanation that required me to deny the evidence. The evidence was, there had been something in my car on the morning of June 17th. Something that knew the routine well enough to provide the checkpoints. Something that had saved my daughter's life by being in the car and being what the autopilot needed in order to complete, and then getting out at the office car park before the heat became fatal. something that wore Sarah's eyes in a hospital room at 3 in the morning and removed a bubble from a drip line and told me our daughter was going to be all right. Something that had been here for 18 months in the specific ways that registered in peripheral experience and never in direct attention, slipping past the defenses of a grieving man who had been explaining everything away because the alternative was impossible, and the impossible was too large to live with. Chapter 9. The shower. I need to tell you about the shower because the shower is where it became undeniable, and I cannot give you the full account without the shower. 3 weeks after June 17th, I was in the shower in the morning and the autopilot was not running because I had made a rule for myself: no autopilot, ever again. Every morning step done consciously and with deliberate attention, every action noted and confirmed before the next one was begun. The phone in my bag before I got in the shower. I checked it before I stepped into the water. I was in the shower, and the shower was the shower, the particular ordinary experience of hot water and the smell of the soap I had been using for years. The radio was on. The weather was forecast, and I heard someone sit down on the edge of the bathtub. Not a creak of the tub's frame, not a shift in the pipes. The specific sound of a person sitting down on the edge of the bathtub, which is a composite sound made of the settling of weight and the small adjustment of position, and the particular ambient quality change that occurs when the space you are in is no longer occupied by only one person. I stood in the shower and I said, very quietly, "Sarah." Nothing answered, but the quality of the air did not change back. The presence, whatever produced the perception of presence, remained. I said, "I know you are there. I have known for a while, I think. I have been explaining you away." The water ran. The radio talked about the roads. I said, "I am not going to explain you away anymore. I want you to know that." I said, "I want you to know that I know what you did on the morning of June 17th. I know you were in the car. I know you were in the hospital. I know about the drip line." I said, "I know you have been here." The quality of the air beside the bathtub was what it was, and I stood in the shower and the water ran, and eventually I said, "Thank you." The two words that were the only words that covered the situation. Thank you for the car and the hospital and the 18 months of being here in the peripheral way you could manage, the way that did not require me to see you directly and do something with that seeing that I was not ready to do. Thank you for being here when I could not see you, and for doing what you could from wherever it is you were doing it from. I finished the shower. I got out. I dried off. On the edge of the bathtub, in the thin film of steam condensed on the porcelain, were two handprints, small, adult-sized, but at the small end of adult-sized. Sarah's hands had always been smaller than most women's hands, which she had complained about because she played piano and smaller hands had a narrower reach. Two handprints on the edge of the bathtub. I stood and looked at them for a long time. Then I took out my phone, which was in my bag where I had put it, and I photographed them. Part 4. What she left. Chapter 10. What Gracie said. I did not ask Gracie about Sarah directly. I was not sure what asking a 4-year-old about her dead mother would produce, or whether producing it was fair to either of us. I observed instead. Gracie talked to herself, the way 4-year-olds do, the constant running commentary of a person whose inner life has not yet developed the convention of internalization. She talked while she played, and while she ate, and while she got dressed, and while she sat in the back of the car, and I listened to this talking the way I listen to everything now, with the full and deliberate attention I had applied to everything since June 17th. What I noticed, Gracie's self-directed talking was sometimes not entirely self-directed. It had the rhythm and structure of conversation rather than monologue. It had pauses in it, intervals where a response would go, and sometimes after the interval she would react, as though she had received one. I noticed this for 2 weeks without saying anything about it. On the 15th day after I came home from the hospital, a Sunday, Gracie was in her room with the door open, and I was in the hallway outside it, and I heard her say, "I know, Mummy, but Daddy made it with the wrong kind of milk." I went to the doorway. Gracie was sitting on the floor with her toy tea set, the one she had gotten for her 3rd birthday, arranging the cups with the particular serious concentration she applied to the important things. She had her back to the door. I said, very carefully, "Who are you talking to, love?" She did not turn around. She picked up the small plastic teapot and poured carefully into one of the cups. She said, "Mummy." I stood in the doorway. She set the teapot down and picked up the cup and held it out toward the empty side of the tea set, toward the place where there was no one sitting. She held it out and she waited, her small arm extended, the tiny plastic cup in her fingers. Then she pulled it back and set it down. She says thank you, but she is fine. She picked up a biscuit from the toy plate and bit into it. She says you worry too much. I said nothing. I leaned against the door frame. My throat was doing the thing it did. Gracie said she knows about the shower. She says the handprints were for you so you would know. I said, "When did she tell you that?" Gracie considered this with the serious face of someone consulting an internal calendar. She said, "This morning, while you were making breakfast." I said, "What else did she say?" Gracie picked up another biscuit. She said, "I am not allowed to tell you everything." I said, "Why not?" Gracie bit the biscuit. She chewed. She considered. She said, "Because some things are too heavy for you right now." Chapter 11, the agreement. I think about what Gracie said every day. The specific phrasing of it, which did not come from Gracie. A 4-year-old does not say some things are too heavy for you right now. A 4-year-old does not have that construction, that particular balance of restraint and consideration. It was Sarah's phrasing. It was the way Sarah talked when she was trying to protect me from something she had already absorbed herself. The specific, gentle economy of a person who has decided that you can only carry so much, and that deciding what that much is an act of love rather than condescension. I talked to the house after that. Not every day, and not in the performing, audible way that would have been alarming to Gracie or to visitors. Quietly, in the particular moments when the quality of the air suggested, I was not talking to no one. In the kitchen in the mornings while I made breakfast. In the car during the school drop-off, which I now did with the specific and permanent attention of a man who will never again let himself enter autopilot. In our bedroom at night after Gracie was asleep, in the dark with the lamp off and the ambient sounds of the house around me, I told her about my day. I told her about the things Gracie had done and said that she would have laughed at. I told her about the things that were hard without her, which was most things, the particular way that grief does not diminish into acceptance, but reshapes itself into the permanent fact of an absence that is itself a presence, a shaped nothing, a you-sized space in every room you were ever in. I told her I knew she was still here, and that I was glad she was still here. I told her I understood that it was not a permanent arrangement, that whatever she had found herself able to do from wherever she was, it was not the same as being here in the full sense, and that I did not expect her to be able to do it indefinitely, and that when she could no longer manage it I would understand, and I would not waste what we had left of it. I told her I was grateful. Every night. Just that. Grateful? I do not know if she heard me. I believe she did. Chapter 12. What I know and do not know. I am going to be honest about what I know and what I do not know, because I believe the distinction matters. What I know. Gracie was not in my car on the morning of June 17th. The nursery's altered entrance confirmed this. The autopilot ran the routine from template rather than from reality, and the template expected certain checkpoints, and something provided those checkpoints. What I know, there was a nurse in Gracie's hospital room at 3 in the morning whom neither of the two nurses on shift that night could account for. The Roman 4 drip line was modified during this nurse's presence. The air bubble that had been accumulating in the line below the chamber was gone when she left. What I know, I have documented 14 distinct instances in the 18 months preceding June 17th of sensory experiences that were specific and consistent, and that I explained away as grief, and that I no longer explain away. What I know, Gracie has conversations with her mother during play. These conversations contain information that Gracie cannot have. The language used when Gracie reports it is Sarah's language. What I do not know what Sarah is. Whether she is a ghost in any of the traditional senses, or something else, something for which ghost is the nearest available word but not an accurate one. Whether what she is doing is effortful, whether it costs her something, whether the limitation on what she can tell me is a limitation of ability or of choice. What I do not know, how long this continues, whether there is a duration to it, a natural end, a point at which whatever she has been doing is no longer possible. Gracie talks to her. I talk to her. The quality of the air in the house is what it is. I do not know how long any of this lasts. What I do not know, whether she knows I know she saved Gracie's life. I think she knows. I told her in the shower. I tell her in the evenings. But knowing and knowing are different things, and I cannot confirm the knowing. What I do know, I am not going to explain it away anymore. That is the one thing I am completely certain of. Whatever it is, whatever she is, however long it lasts, I am not going to explain it away. She was here. She has been here. She is here now in whatever way she is able to be here. And I am not going to waste that by being the kind of person who looks at the most important thing in the world and decides it must be a trick of the light. Part 5, now Chapter 13. The mornings are different now. Not easier exactly, though easier in some ways. Different in the specific way that things are different when you have revised your understanding of them, when the same facts occupy a different meaning. I do the morning routine consciously and with full attention. Phone in bag before shower, every morning without exception. A deliberate ritual as important to me as any other. Every step noted. Every action completed and confirmed before the next begins. I will never again let the autopilot run unchecked, not because the autopilot is untrustworthy, but because the autopilot operates from the template of the past, and the present is not always identical to the past. And the difference between the template and the present is where disasters live. Gracie goes to school now. She is 6. She carries her backpack herself, which is still enormous on her frame and which she would not have carried any other way if you offered her any alternative in the world. She has the amber-brown eyes that change in changing light. She talks constantly. She is, in the matter of talking, made entirely from Sarah's blueprint. She talks to Sarah less than she did when she was 4. Whether this is because the conversations are happening and I am not hearing them, or because they are happening less is something I cannot determine. 6-year-olds have more of an interior life than 4-year-olds, more capacity for private experience. She does not report to me the way she did, but sometimes in the car she says, "Mummy says to tell you the front left tire is getting low." The front left tire is always getting low. It was always getting low when Sarah was alive too. We had it patched twice. Sarah always caught it before I did. And sometimes in the evenings, Gracie looks at a point slightly to my left and says, "She says you're doing really well, Daddy." And I say, "Tell her thank you." And Gracie says she knows. Chapter 14. The night I heard her, I have heard her voice twice in the 3 years since Sarah died. Not the ambient presence, not the quality of the air, not the peripheral experience of another person in the space. Her voice, clear and specific and unmistakably hers. The first time was on what would have been our 8th wedding anniversary, which fell 6 months after she died. I was in the kitchen, and I had been pretending to myself for most of the day that I was not aware of what day it was, and that the awareness was not sitting on my chest like a physical weight, and I was making dinner with the particular focused mechanical attention of someone who is using a task to manage an emotional state. And from behind me, from the direction of the kitchen doorway, Sarah's voice said, "The pasta timer went off." I turned around. Nobody. But the pasta timer had gone off, the small sound of it, and I had not heard it. I drained the pasta. I said, "Thank you." The second time was the night after Gracie came home from the hospital. I had put Gracie to bed, and I had sat in the chair in her room until she was fully asleep, and her breath was the slow and regular breath of someone fully under. And then I had gone to our bedroom, and I had sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. I had not cried very much in the 3 days of the hospital. I had not had the capacity for it in the hospital, had not had the processing space for anything other than the monitoring of Gracie, and the waiting for the next set of numbers and the management of my own state, so that I could be functional for her. But sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark after she was home and asleep, with the 3 days finally fully present, and the weight of what had almost happened, and the weight of what I had done, and the weight of everything landing all at once, I cried. I cried in the way that you cry when you have been holding something for 3 days, and your body has decided it is done holding it, which is not a dignified way to cry. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and I was not quiet about it, and I did not try to be. And from the other side of the bed, from Sarah's side, her voice said, "She is home, David. She is home, and she is all right. She is all right." I sat on the edge of the bed, and I listened to her voice say it, and I stopped crying because the weight that had been sitting on my chest since June 17th lifted by a specific amount when I heard her say it, not entirely, but by enough to breathe. I said, "I know." She said, "You did not break her. She is whole. She came home." I said, "I know." She said, "David." I said, "I am here." She said, "I know you are." And then the room was the room, and the dark was the dark, and I lay down on my side of the bed, and I slept for the first time in 4 days. Chapter 15. What I want you to know, I am writing this because 3 years is long enough to understand it, or to understand as much of it as I am going to understand, and because I think it needs to be written down. I am not writing it to convince you that ghosts are real, or that the dead can communicate with the living, or that any specific metaphysical framework is correct. I am not in a position to defend any of those claims in any rigorous sense, and I do not intend to try. I am writing it to say this: pay attention to what you explain away. We are very good at explaining things away. It is a useful skill in ordinary life, where most unexplained experiences have ordinary explanations, and the effort of investigation exceeds the value of the information. The brain, which is efficient, learns to dismiss things. It cannot immediately categorize and to move on. The lower levels handle the dismissal automatically, so that the upper levels can attend to things that require attention. But sometimes the thing you are dismissing is the most important thing. Sometimes the sound in the hallway that you explain away as the house settling is the sound of someone who is trying to reach you from a distance they cannot fully cross. Sometimes the warmth on the other side of the bed is the warmth of something real. Sometimes the voice that says the pasta timer went off is the voice of someone who is still here in the only way they are able to be here, and the ability to be here is finite. and explaining it away is wasting it. I lost 18 months to explaining away. 18 months of Sarah being in this house in whatever way she could manage, providing whatever she could provide from wherever she was, and I explained it away. I do not forgive myself for this as an act of will. I understand why I did it, which is not the same as forgiving it, and I live with the understanding. What I do now is pay attention. Full, deliberate, upper-level attention to the things that register in the peripheral and the ambient, the quality of the air and the sounds that do not have ready sources, and the particular warmth of recently occupied spaces. She is still here. I do not know for how long. I do not ask, because I understand that some things are too heavy for me right now, and that the person who understands this best is the person who always understood it best. She is still here, and I am not explaining her away. That is the whole of what I want you to know. Pay attention to the things at the edge of your perception, the things you are about to dismiss, to the sounds that almost have sources, and the warmth that almost has a body, and the voice that almost has a direction. Sometimes the explanation that serves the evidence is the one you are most afraid to accept. Sometimes the most frightening thing is not what is there. It is the possibility that it has always been there, patient and present and trying, and that the only thing standing between you and knowing it is the ordinary human habit of looking away. Do not look away. Chapter 16. This morning I will tell you about this morning, because this morning is why I sat down to write this today instead of next week or next month. I was in the shower. The routine, the deliberate, conscious, upper-level attended routine that is never again going to be handed to the autopilot. Phone in bag, phone confirmed in bag, water on, radio on, soap, ordinary, the ordinary shower of an ordinary morning, and I heard her sit down on the edge of the bathtub. The composite sound, the settling of weight, the small adjustment, the quality change in the air. I stood in the shower and I said, "Good morning." The water ran. The radio talked about the roads. And from the edge of the bathtub, in a voice that was quieter than I had heard it before, quieter than the pasta timer, and quieter than the hospital night, and quieter than the edge of the bed in the dark, Sarah's voice said, "Good morning." I cannot stay much longer. I stood in the shower with the water running. I said, "I know." She said, "Gracie is going to be fine." I said, "I know." She said, "So are you." I stood in the shower for a long time. Then I said, "I know." "Sarah, I know." The shower ran. The radio moved on to weather. The edge of the bathtub was what it was, the ambient warmth of a space that is not quite empty. I finished the shower. I got out. I dried off. I got dressed. I went to wake Gracie, who was not a cheerful waker. I called her name twice from the doorway. I turned on the light. I put on her television channel. She grumbled. She negotiated. She accepted the morning. I made her cereal. I poured my coffee. She complained that her cereal was too milky. I told her to eat it anyway. She ate it anyway, making her opinion known. I dressed her. She wanted to wear the red jumper. I told her it was too warm for a jumper. She made her opinion known. We negotiated. The red jumper was not worn. We both considered this a satisfactory outcome. I loaded her into the car. Her backpack was enormous on her small frame. She carried it herself. I buckled her in. I sat in the driver's seat. I checked that my phone was in my bag. It was in my bag. I started the car. From behind me, in the back seat, from the direction of the window on the right side, I heard the very small and very specific sound of someone shifting in a seat. I looked in the rearview mirror. Gracie was looking out the window at the morning, the amber-brown eyes that changed in changing light, taking in the street and the houses and the particular quality of the early light. The sound had not come from Gracie's side of the car. I looked in the mirror at the left rear window for a moment. Then I said quietly toward the left rear window, "I will take care of her." The left rear window was the left rear window. The morning was the morning. Gracie said, "I know, Daddy. I drove."